The Syrian civil war and the escalating humanitarian crisis are dominating proceedings here at the United Nations in New York. Hello, I'm Anand, Naidoo, and this is The Heat. Efforts to resolve the crisis in Syria are intensifying. The United Nations has announced a new special envoy to the country. He has just begun work, and the United States is expanding its bombing campaign against Islamic State militants to Syria itself. Here's the latest.
Please raise their hands.
From the United Nations Security Council chamber, a new assault targeting a common and highly dangerous enemy, the Islamic State militant group, a terrorist network waging violence and brutality across Iraq and Syria, threatening peace and security in the region and the world. On Wednesday, world leaders agreed on a resolution proposed by the U.S. that targets foreign terrorist fighters, people who leave their home country to enlist in terrorist training with IS and other extremist groups.
Specifically, nations are required to prevent and suppress the recruiting, organizing, transporting, or equipping of foreign terrorist fighters, as well as the financing of their travel or activities.
President Barack Obama, who called the extraordinary session to mobilize unity among nations in neutralizing the IS threat, hailed the vote and pressed for its implementation.
Promises on paper cannot keep us safe. Lofty rhetoric and good intentions will not stop a single terrorist attack. The words spoken here today must be matched and translated into action.
This action against foreign fighters comes as a group of nations this week carried out airstrikes on IS strongholds in Syria.
Missiles may kill terrorists, but good governance kills terrorism. Free and independent societies, free from suffering, oppression, and occupation. This is what will kill terrorism.
Li Tan, CCTV, New York.
Joining us now is Stephane Dujarric. He is the spokesman for the Secretary General of the United Nations. Stephane, thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
We've just heard from the Special Envoy for Syria talking about his job. It's a formidable task that he has. What are his priorities?
Well, his priorities is getting the political process back on track. I think his focus is the Syrian people and the suffering they've gone through for the last 3 years now, and how that needs to stop. And the way it needs to stop is by addressing the political issues and getting the political process back on track.
So what are his plans? I mean, has he got a game plan for this?
Well, I think, Stephane is one of our more skilled and seasoned diplomats. He's on a listening tour. I think he's harvesting a lot of opinions. He's listening to a lot of people. He was in Damascus not long ago. He met with President Assad. He did part of a regional tour. He will continue with consultations here. He met the Arab League foreign ministers. He'll go back to the region, and I think he's testing the waters, and then he'll figure out how best to move the process forward.
Is he talking to the Syrian opposition?
I think he will talk to as broad range of people as he can. I mean, everybody needs to be around the table, as we've seen in the Geneva talks.
Because if he is talking to the opposition, I was wondering how he chooses which people are in the opposition, because some, of course, he will not be talking to.
I mean, I think, as the UN, I think we need, and as an envoy in any political or diplomatic negotiations, we need to have the right to speak to whomever we need to speak. It doesn't mean engage any legitimacy one way or another, but as mediators, that's what we need to do.
And what about regional partners in the area?
Yes, I think he's, he was in Paris on the sidelines of the Iraq meeting to speak to all the regional foreign ministers and heads of governments that were there. Whether it's the Iranians and others. His deputy was meeting with the Iranian president and the Secretary General last night. The regional powers have a big part to play in stopping this conflict.
As you said, the focus is on a political solution, but of course Syria has got a huge humanitarian problem right now. Is he focusing on that as well?
Well, I think it is a large part of his motivation. We have, in order to alleviate the humanitarian. Now, the humanitarian is always an avenue into the political as well, but we have the other parts of the UN High Commission for Refugees, UNICEF, World Food Program, who are doing an amazing job in addressing the humanitarian plight. We have more than 3 million refugees, a million of them more than a million of them in Lebanon. A quarter of Lebanon's population are Syrian refugees. And I think, for any of us who have the privilege of living in a country at peace, if we can imagine what that would mean for the economy, if a quarter of our population in less than 2 years came from the refugees. So we're doing our best to address the problem, but it's really a Band-Aid until the political issues are solved.
Yeah, because you just had a situation in Turkey right now where 130,000 refugees crossed the border, and that was just in 3 days.
I mean, I think we become numb to the numbers, right? I mean, we hear 130,000, 3 million, but it's 130,000 people with 170,000 stories.
The United States and 5 of its Arab allies have started bombing Islamic State targets in Syria. What kind of impact does that have on the job that the Special Envoy has to do?
Well, I think, the Special Envoy's job is probably one of the most difficult ones we have, that any Special Envoy has for the
Especially
for the
in this
UN.
case.
In this case, I mean, there is no more difficult political situation. It's a fast-moving environment. I think what the Secretary General said yesterday is that he took note that there was a broad coalition of countries engaged. He would hope that the Security Council on foreign fighters would come together in address this issue of terrorism and foreign fighters. We have seen the Council being able to be united on Syria, on chemical weapons, on humanitarian aid. We need them to be united in order to move this process forward.
But I'm just wondering, does this complicate the situation for the Special Envoy? Or in some respects, does it make it a little bit easier for him?
I think it's a situation that's ongoing. It's a complicated situation. Everything makes it more complicated, but there are issues that need to be addressed. The terrorism, the atrocious act we've seen Daesh and other terrorist groups commit have to be addressed. They have to be addressed not by one country alone. They have to be addressed by a broad coalition within the confines of international law.
Given the huge numbers of people who are being displaced, given the terrorist act that you've just pointed out that are being carried out, how concerned is the United Nations that there could be wider destabilization in the region, especially with all these people being forced to move, being displaced?
Well, I think the acts of terrorism, these terrorist groups that we've seen, did not come to exist in a vacuum. They are a product of the political instability that we've seen in Syria for 3 years. So the humanitarian issues have to be addressed, the terrorism has to be addressed, but at the center of it, the political dialogue, the political issues have to be addressed, because that's the only way we're going to get any stability in Syria in the long term. Right,
and as the previous Special Envoy to Syria has pointed out as well, it's been a very intractable problem. Is there a level of confidence now that Bashar al-Assad may be keen on finding a political solution to this?
I think it's early days. The Special Envoy had a good meeting with President Assad. He was welcomed in Damascus, which is a good thing for us. Stephane is a very skilled and meticulous diplomat. He will do his rounds, and then he'll show his cards. But I do think it needs to. We need to have a show of unity on the Security Council. As I've said, chemical weapons, they need to be dealt with. The Russians, the Americans, the Chinese, the French, the British, or the other 10 members of the Council were completely united on it. So it is possible. We need to find that consensus in order to move forward.
And when you look at getting the cooperation of regional partners in this effort to resolve the political conflict, is the Special Envoy going to be talking to, say, Iran? Does he see a bigger role for Iran?
I think, any country, any party that can have an influence on one side or another, and this is in fact a situation where there's more than two sides. It's a multitude of sides.
Right.
All of them have a role to play. Some countries may be part of the problem, but if they are part of the problem, they need to be part of the solution.
What about Russia? Has the Secretary General or the envoy been speaking to Russia? Russia is one of the main backers of Bashar al-Assad.
Yes, I think, the Secretary General was on the phone with President Putin just 2 days ago, and it's clear that whether it's the Russians or the Americans, they all have critical roles to play because they have a critical influence over the players.
Now, when it comes to Stephane de Mistura, who is the special envoy, what are his plans in the weeks and months ahead?
As I said, in the weeks ahead, he will continue his consultations. He's having a whole series of meetings here. I mean, this is really the ground zero of diplomacy, so it's a great place for him to see the Turkish, the Iranians, the Russians. He's doing that. He will go back to the Geneva and go back to the region. But I think, as I said, Stephane is pretty careful and meticulous and will do it one step at a time.
And there seem to be different goals, if I could put it that way, on what's trying to be achieved in Syria. I mean, the United States has made it very clear, President Obama has made it very clear that his goal is Assad must go. You know, there's no place for Bashar al-Assad. How does the UN and especially the special envoy feel about that?
I think it's a matter of squaring the circle. I think the big powers all have their positions staked out. The Syrian government, the Syrian opposition. Our role is trying to nudge them back to the table and ensure a political deal.
Are we going to see a meeting pretty soon?
You know, I think it's too, this is not a betting man's game. I wouldn't put any money on anything, but I would put my faith in the special envoy.
Stephane Dujarric, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. That was the United Nations spokesman for the Secretary General, Stephane Dujarric, talking to us. You're watching The Heat. We'll be back with more in a moment.